Hello and welcome to my channel if you're new. If there's one thing I've been doing a lot of lately, it's listening to audiobooks, which has single-handedly saved my reading goal for the year. I'm sure other people can relate to the feeling of just not being able to sit down and just read a book for a certain amount of time and just needing to walk around and do things. Audiobooks have really helped me. You could listen to them when you're driving, when you're doing chores, anything that you don't need to be actively listening and talking, you could just listen to an audiobook. I never thought I would be the type of person who is an audiobook listener, but I'm completely am now. Well, I also still read books just because I also like reading them, but audiobooks are just a special little experience and I really enjoy them, and some books are just amazing as audiobooks. I wouldn't have preferred to read those books. First, I want to say I'm currently listening to audiobooks using my public library. You can get a free online library card. You don't even have to go in person. You could just do this all online. Okay, so let's get into some of my favorite audiobooks. Also, I'll say whenever one is my favorite. Okay, starting off with one of my all-time favorites. I feel like this is one of the best audiobooks that I'm just ever going to read ever, and this is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's such a good book. Of course, a good audiobook partly has to do with the book being really good. This book was perfect as an audiobook because it's told in an interview style, and it also has a cast of characters that are all talking as the different voices, so it really feels like a real interview. It almost felt like I was watching a movie in my head when I was listening to this, and I did already have this book. It was just one of those books that I was having a really hard time starting. That's another positive about audiobooks, is if you have a book that you're really scared to read, or you're just putting off for one reason or another, if you just put on the audiobook while you're doing anything and just have it on, then you'll get sucked into the story if you like the book, and you won't have to worry about that having to pick it up and actively get yourself into it. All the emotions anxiety that usually stop me from getting into a book for some reason, it just doesn't happen. And then I get to that point in the book where I'm completely in it, and even if I wasn't listening to the audiobook, I would read it anyway because I'm just so invested. I've talked about this one a bit before in some other videos. It's about this band who gets together and just becomes really famous, and you see behind the scenes of what these people's lives are actually like, and you just see them go from starting off chasing their dreams, not having any money, to this massive success. And there's also this love story a little bit, will they won't they. There is I don't want to say too much, so I'm not gonna. It's pretty heartbreaking, devastating, frustrating, but also beautiful and amazing. Also, there's a show on, I think it's Amazon Prime, so if you want to watch that show before, if you're that type of person, then you could do that, and you could also watch it after if you want to read the book first too. I don't know which I'd recommend because I've only done it one way, but I don't know, I think it'd be fine either way. I want to get the ones that I don't have the physical copies of out of the way so that I don't forget about them. First up, one that I just recently finished, Winter in Paradise by Ellen Hilderbrand. This book is so good, and the audiobook was just such a treat. I wasn't expecting the audiobook to be that good. I wasn't expecting it to be bad, but I just hadn't heard anything about it. I heard a bunch about Daisy Jones and the Six. I feel like everyone talks about how good that audiobook is, or at least I've heard a lot of people mention it. But Winter in Paradise really took me by surprise. I was just trying to read a summer book because I'm trying to get some summer book recommendations under my sleeve. But yeah, both the narration and the book itself, the storyline, really just, I was shocked by how much I loved it. It combines, okay, think of the show Big Little Lies and then the movie The Other Woman. This book has those sorts of themes in it. It starts with all these different POVs from different characters, but the POVs, they're intros to the characters, but they're also all on this one specific day, because on that specific day something happens, an incident happens that connects all these different characters. And then in the beginning, it's I was wondering, are they gonna meet each other somehow? How's this gonna work? And then they all end up in the Caribbean, and then all their stories converge, and it's very fun and interesting, and I love how different all of the characters are. I feel like I know these random types of people. One of the characters a little bit reminds me of Ron Swanson, and it's just so funny. If you've ever seen Parks and Rec, shout out to Ron. So there's a really intriguing mystery that I haven't gotten to the bottom of yet, so because there's a second and a third book. You do find out a lot though, you unravel a lot of secrets, but I was just constantly wondering what is happening, what's gonna happen, what is the ending going to be. There's also some different romances through the different POVs. I'm really invested in one, and that is in the main girl that it starts off with, who she's a Midwestern girl boss wife mom. That's who she is. I don't know how else to describe her, but that's why I said Big Little Lies and The Other Woman, because I feel her whole story, like the stuff that's happening, like it reminds me of her. But yeah, I just wanted to give a little explanation because that's a really good audiobook. So if you're looking to listen to an audiobook and that sounds interesting to you, that's a great one. Another audiobook that I really love is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This one like blew me away. I've never even read a book like that. I'm pretty sure it's a memoir. I don't know if I said that right. Memoir. I think this happened the last time I was talking about it in a video too. I don't know. Jeanette McCurdy, if you don't know who that is, she played as Sam Puckett on iCarly when she was younger. This book really goes into being like a star at a young age like she was, and her relationship with her mom that was really unhealthy and abusive. There's a lot that happens in this book, but if you're just interested in learning about her story, the entire book just felt really raw and honest, vulnerable, and just had a lot of heart and humor and strength in it, and I thought that it was just an amazing read. I couldn't stop listening to it. I think I might have read that one in a day. Part of why it's one of my favorite audiobooks is because Jeanette McCurdy narrated it herself. In her own voice, she's just taking you through these different experiences in her life. You just really hear like the emotion, and when she's like making jokes, being funny, like the humor, just like all these different layers to her voice, it just adds to the story and it's so good. I listened to A Fate of Wrath and Flame as an audiobook. This book is just like an amazing book, so I think that's definitely part of why this one is just my favorite. But I also think the narrator did a really good job and I was entertained throughout the whole thing. It's one narrator doing the voices, so it's definitely like if that's something that bothers you, it's just like one person doing all the dialogue, then maybe this is not for you, but I really do recommend it. I liked it a lot. Sometimes the narrator, if it's just one voice, they still do like a really good job doing all the different voices, and they're so talented because they just make them all sound different so consistently, and they don't sound like bad or anything. I do have some that I didn't really like, but this one, amazing. This is a adult fantasy book. It starts in the mortal world with this girl. She's kind of like spent her life like looking out for herself. She's kind of scarred, like a lot of stuff has happened to her in her young life. She makes a living by stealing, so she just like is really good at stealing, and she always has been, and she got hired by someone. She didn't really get hired by them, she kind of got trapped into doing it because she tried to steal from his daughter. So now she's basically working for free for this guy because, you know, if not, then she would have probably been killed from stealing from his daughter. But then one day this girl like knows her real name and she knows like all this random stuff about her, and then she just ends up completely taking down everyone that she's worked for and making this not really a deal with her, but kind of forcing her again into another situation where she's like working for someone, which is her. She ends up swapping places with this person from a different realm, and it's like that's where the fantasy comes in. There's vampires, witches, just like elemental powers. There's an enemies to lovers romance. The person that she is in this new world is betrothed to this king. The girl who was in her body, or in that body before her, tried to kill the king's parents and then flee, but then she got shot through with an arrow and everyone thought she died, but she came back as the girl from the mortal world. So that king really hates her, but that is an enemies to lovers story waiting to happen, and it does happen. The Bear and the Nightingale is a really like scenic, I don't know if scenic's the right word, but what I'm trying to say is like the scenery is described very beautifully, and it's like snowy. There's a lot of Russian folklore in this. The narrator speaks in a Russian accent. I don't know if it's like actual Russian accent or if it's just someone like doing or like trying to do Russian accent. I'm not really sure, like I don't know what it's exactly supposed to sound like, but I just know that this is a great one to listen to if you're trying to feel like you're being told a fairy tale or like a folk story, I guess. It's just so beautiful, and this is one of those books that actually scared me to get into, and now I'm so happy I read it. It's definitely one of the most unique and interesting fantasy books I've ever read. Bloodmarked is the sequel to Legendborn. I'm sure they have like the same narrators, but I've only listened to the audiobook for Bloodmarked. Like the last two, there's only one narrator narrating this entire thing. The narrator does a really good job throughout the whole thing. There's only like some points where they do some accents that sound like a little bit wonky, but those accents are in the story a lot, and it doesn't bother me enough to be like really thrown off the book, because that's definitely happened to me before where I'm reading and I get kind of thrown off by the voices, but that did not happen with this one. I just really enjoyed it. Sometimes too, like for a book that's this thick, it takes me like a long time to read it and I get a little bit overwhelmed, but this one I feel like I read it and got into it so quickly because it was an audiobook. I felt like I was really easily able to imagine the scenery and like what was taking place. Like again, it was one of those moments where it felt like it was like a movie in my head. I like the narrator's tone, and I felt like it went through through really smoothly. I just felt really like pulled right into it, and then it was just like smooth sailing. So if this one is on your TBR or Legendborn as well, then I do recommend the audiobook. I think it was pretty good. One of my most recent audiobook reads has been Violet Made of Thorns. This is a YA fantasy. It's enemies to lovers. I really liked this audiobook. Again, there was only one voice narrating it, but I thought they did a really good job, and it's one of those audiobooks that I just enjoyed a lot. I'm just gonna read the little blurb because I feel like that does a really good job of like describing the vibe of this, and the blurb is by Chloe Gong, and if anyone really likes These Violent Delights, that's the author of that book. The author of this is Gina Chen though. Beautifully vicious, perfect for the fairy tale reader who has always wanted the heroine to grow sharp teeth and bite Prince Charming. That is the vibe of this book. The main character is a fortune teller, and she basically just tells people kind of like what they want to hear. Like, she is actually a fortune teller, but people just don't like hearing things that they don't like to hear. So she works for the king, and the king kind of just like makes her into his puppet. Like, she just has to kind of do whatever he says and make things happen. One of the things that he asks her to predict is that his son will find someone to get married to. His son and the main character in this, they've known each other since they were children, and they used to get along. They became kind of like enemies, like they always jab at each other, and it just like seems like they really don't like each other at all. But then she actually starts getting like visions and dreams and stuff that have to do with the prince. But bottom line, audiobook was good. One of my all-time favorite audiobooks ever. I'm listening to the second one of it right now. It's amazing. I know I'm gonna listen to the third. I just love these books a lot. This is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and it's a YA mystery book. There's also a bit of romance in there for those romance lovers out there. One thing I did like about the physical book is that it has like little diagrams drawn out in it and stuff, but in the audiobook it does a pretty good job of like explaining the diagrams in a way that like makes sense, and it translates to exactly what they look like. The reason there's diagrams and stuff is because there's like little clues and things that they find. Like, there could be a piece of paper that they find in someone's trash can, or like one of the things is they're looking through someone's planner and it's all like written out and everything, or it's just Pip, the main character's notes that she takes on the case. She's a high school student who's doing a school project, and she decides to do it on this murder case that went like unresolved. There wasn't a final resolution to the case. This girl, Andy Bell, was killed. Everyone came to the conclusion that it was her boyfriend Sal Singh that killed her, but Pip, the main character in this book, 5 years later doing this project, she's like, I actually want to open back up that case and look into it because I don't think Sal did it. So she ends up teaming up with Sal's brother. She definitely puts herself and like everyone that she loves life in danger a bit, because she just does some crazy things. Like, she is risky. She's just goes out on a ledge for this case. Like, she puts her all into it, and as like the reader, the listener, like it makes you just sit on the edge of your seat. Everything just feels so high stakes. I was actually thinking about these books today and what makes them so good. One of the things that these books do is when you're reading it and there's like someone who becomes suspicious, Pip, the main character, will actually like in her own observation and conclusions, she'll break down everything that happened, and she'll like address the fact that that person is suspicious, or like they're a suspect now, even if it's not for sure that they did it. All of the, or at least most of the suspicions that I end up having, she ends up addressing too, which makes it feel like we're on the same page. Most of this is read through the narrator of the person who narrates for Pip, but there is like a cast for these books with the characters because there are audio recordings. They even sound like audio recordings when you're listening to them, and they have like the different voices of whoever it is, and those audio recordings are done so well. They're always just like Pip interviewing someone, and yeah, I think they're done so well. And the fact that it's not like too scary to where I will like have bad dreams and stuff about it, but it's just like, it's just enough for me, and it's so good. This is a YA fantasy namesake, and it's the second book to Fable. I just recently kind of listened to this, so I talked about it not that long ago. I got a little bit distracted while listening to this one, but I still think it's a really good book, and I would recommend the duology. There was only one person narrating this, but I thought they did a really good job. So like, not one of my favorites, but it was a solid read, and I think that if you like listening to audiobooks and you want to read like a good YA fantasy, I really like Fable and Namesake. The Simple Wilds was so good. There is one person just narrating the whole thing for this one. I just have realized that this doesn't happen with every audiobook that I listen to, but this one I was like fully sucked into it, and I was like feeling all of the emotions, like hanging on to every thread of like what was being said and stuff. I feel like the audiobook for that reason did a really good job. This is a small town grumpy sunshine-ish romance. It's not completely grumpy sunshine, but it's like grumpy and then like kind of grumpy-ish other person. It's like city girl goes to small town in Alaska where her dad who is dying. She basically hadn't seen him in years, so she's learning about this like whole life that he has and meeting people in his life. And there's this one pilot who she ends up meeting, and that's who the romance is with, and he's very grumpy and he just thinks that she's like stuck up and like city girl type of thing, and he's like very much Alaska flying. I don't know. But yeah, it's a very heartwarming book. I liked it a lot. And that is all for my favorite audiobooks or audiobooks that I'd recommend. Subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. I also talk about books on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Goodreads. If you want to see those, they'll all be linked in the description. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.